We've got a lot of complexity to talk about. We're going to cover how PowerShell actually passes information from one command to the next through the pipeline. And there's really two ways it does that. Plan A, which it always tries first, is by value. Plan B, which comes afterwards if Plan A fails, is called by property name. And I'm not only going to show you how these work, but I'm going to show you how to find out when they will work. Sometimes you're going to need to send data from one command to another, and the data isn't going to be in exactly the form that the second command needs to work on it. So I'm going to show you how to rename things mid-pipeline to make them work. And sometimes you're going to need to use a command that just doesn't accept piped in input. So I'll show you another couple of techniques, including using parentheticals and expanding or extracting property values contents. So again, the point of this nugget is to answer the question, why does this work? Why does, and let's be gentle here. Let's maybe go with, name notepad. What makes this command work? What exactly is causing this data to get over to here? I mean, look, it's all well and good to say, well, the pipeline is making it happen. Sure, a miracle occurs and the pipeline makes it happen. Let's kind of regress a bit. Let's talk about what the old command.exe shell would do. In command.exe, and this actually applies to Unix shells as well, so I mean this is a really well understood, long-running method. Every command that you run has three standardized ports, I guess you could call them. Standard in, standard out, and standard error. Now, for command.exe and for Unix commands, this is fine. Whatever comes out of standard out gets displayed on the screen. Errors are reported on standard error, and then any input that the thing is going to take goes in through standard in. So when you pipe two commands, when you pipe one command to another, the shell is really just hooking up the first command's out to the second command's in. It's up to the second command to understand what the heck to do with that data, and it's up to the first command to produce something that the second command can actually work with. PowerShell does not work like that at all. That has nothing to do with how PowerShell's pipeline works. In fact, here's a real simple rule to remember. A PowerShell command can only accept input on one of its parameters. That's it. PowerShell commands don't have standard in, they don't have standard out, they don't have standard error, they don't have any of that stuff. What they've got are parameters. So when you run a command and you pipe it to another command, PowerShell has to look at what this first one is producing, and then it has to look at the parameters of this one to see which parameter or parameters are going to receive that information. So piping is a process of PowerShell analyzing the output from here and figuring out which parameter can accept that information and then magically hooking the two together. So it's a reasonably more complicated process, I would say, and it requires a little bit of work. So the first thing PowerShell has to do is it has to look and see what type of data the first command produces. And it does that the same way you would do it. It essentially, in its head, pipes it to get member. I mean, it doesn't really do that. It doesn't need to, but we're going to do that so we can see this. And this is where it learns that this command produces objects of the type system.diagnostics.process. Now for shortcuts, we'll usually see these type names referred to just by the last piece of the type name. So for right now, just remember that getProcess produces objects of the type process. Should be pretty easy to remember since the noun of the command is also process. So now PowerShell has got to look and see, if I'm going to continue my example of getProcess and pipe it to stopProcess, PowerShell has to see which parameter of stopProcess can accept that information. So we look at the help for stopProcess, and we need to look at the full help. This is very, very important. So just looking at the parameters here, can you see a parameter that is capable of accepting one or more process objects? I know I can. Here it is, minus input object. The parameter name is minus input object. I can tell because it starts with a dash. It accepts objects of the type process. And I can tell that that's the type of object it accepts because that's what appears within the angle brackets. It can accept more than one. And I can tell that because it's got the two square brackets jammed up against each other. That means more than one. The trick here is, can it accept that information from the pipeline? And we have to keep reading. So we have to go down in the full help until we get to input object and learn that it does accept pipeline input by value. By value is plan A. That is what PowerShell always tries first. So, let's take a non-IT example here. If you got a pitcher and he's throwing baseballs, the catcher has got to have a mitt capable of catching baseballs, right? Does that make sense? So if my first command is producing baseballs, I got to be throwing that to a guy who's a baseball catcher. If my first command is producing hockey pucks, I don't want to be sending that off to a baseball catcher because he's going to get hurt. So whatever type of data the first command produces gets linked up by value to one of the parameters of the second command. So that's why that works. And we can play with that by running get process, stop process, minus what if. And we can see that that actually does something. Okay, that's straightforward enough. Let's do a different one. Does that make sense? I mean, can you imagine what that's going to try and do? Because I mean, look, a service, if it's running, is associated with a process. Of course, you can have services that are not running and they're not associated with a process, but you know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you think will happen. What matters here is, what do we think PowerShell will try and do? So we start by looking at the type of output produced by the first command. Pipe it to GM. GM tells me that this command produces objects of the type service controller. Okay, so now let's go back and look at the help for stop process. That was our second command. Look at the full help. Can you see any parameters that are capable of accepting objects of the type service controller? No, you cannot. And because none of these parameters accept service controller, the whole first plan, plan A, by value, is off the table. So we've tried by value. That's gone. And so now we're going to switch to a different mode called by property name. This one is a little bit trickier. We actually need to go through every single parameter of this second command, and we need to see which parameters, if any, are programmed to accept pipeline input by property name. So let's start with the, what do you think? The force command is the first one here, or force parameter. Does not accept pipeline input. The ID parameter accepts pipeline input by property name. Grab a piece of paper and a pen and write that down. ID. Let's keep looking. Input object does not accept pipeline input by property name. It does accept it by value, but we've moved on. That was plan A. Plan A failed. Name accepts pipeline input by property name. So write that down. Now we've got two, ID and name. Next up, pass through does not, confirm does not, what if does not, and that's it. So we're done. So we've got two, name and ID. Those are called candidate parameters. I need to go back now and look at the output of get service and pipe it to GM. Does the, and you know what? Let's just look at properties. So this is going to show us all the properties. It's a little easier way to get all this on the screen at the same time. So we have two candidate parameters, name and ID. Does the output of the first command have an ID parameter? Does it have, property? Does it have a name property? I don't see ID on this list here. Nowhere in here do I see it. Name, on the other hand, I got right there. So look, this is where I sometimes lose people because nobody wants to believe that this is as low tech as it is. Get service, stop process. Because plan A failed, because get service is producing objects that stop process can't take, we've shifted over to by property name. I know that get service has a name property, and I know that stop process has a name parameter that accepts pipeline input by property name. It also has an ID parameter that accepts pipeline input by property name. Brace yourself. Strictly because this is spelled N-A-M-E and this is spelled N-A-M-E, they're going to be connected. This is spelled ID and there's no corresponding property over here, so there will be no connection between the first command and the second command on the ID parameter. So this is just because they're spelled the same. It's not any more complicated than that. N-A-M-E is going to connect to the parameter N-A-M-E. In other words, the names of my services are going to be fed to the name parameter of stop process, just because the property is spelled the same. So stop process minus question mark. What is the, let's do minus full here. Help stop process minus full. What's the name property parameter actually do? Specifies the process names of the processes to be stopped. Okay. You ready for this? Get service, stop, process, minus what if. Errors, 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 errors. Why so many errors? Well, because I told stop process to stop a process named SC policy SVC. There is not actually a process called that. The service is called that, but its executable isn't called that. Service names are names like bits, but it actually might run as service host.exe in the process list, right? So piping the service name to stop process doesn't give it the right information. Now the service does know the executable, but the problem is that information didn't make it over to the second command. It's the name that made it over because they're spelled the same. All right, so that's the basics of that. I want to show you an example where that works now, where that whole by property name thing actually is functional. Let's take a real simple example here. What's a good one? Let's try doing, oh, I know. Let's look at the help for get event log. Get event log has a minus computer name parameter. It's over here. Let's go down and look at that in the full help. See if it takes pipeline input. Oh, it doesn't. Well, that sucks. How about get service? Yeah, that's got a parameter called computer name. Does it accept? Ooh, look, it accepts pipeline input by property name. Ha, okay. Here's what we're going to do then. You guys know what a CSV file is, right? Notepad computers.csv. First line of a CSV file is the header. So I'm going to create a header called computer name, localhost DC member client. And I'm going to save that. So I've got 4 data rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a column header called computer name. So check this out. Import CSV computers.csv. Right? So this gets me 4 objects. Each object has a computer name property. I'm going to pipe that to get member just to prove it. See there at the very end of the list, there's a computer name property. There's a property spelled computer name. C-O-M-P-U-T-E-R-N-A-M-E. Look what I'm doing here. I'm piping in objects that have a property spelled computer name. I'm hoping they'll connect up to the minus computer name parameter of get service, because the minus computer name parameter accepts pipeline input by property name, and the parameter is spelled the same as the incoming property. Now I don't know, the problem with this command, of course, is that it doesn't actually tell you what computer everything came with, but I'm betting, because this is alphabetic, we'll have gotten at least one computer's results. Yeah, we did. And see, here's the A's, and here's the W's. So that was probably a previous computer before it started over with the next one. I have no idea which computers it actually queried because it doesn't show me that, but it did query multiple computers, gosh darn it, and there's a third one. There's a third set of W's. And there's the A's, and there's W's again. So I think it actually did query all 4 computers. Isn't that awesome? So I mean, this is what makes that super, super neat. All right, I'm going to show you another really cool example for this because we need to dive into some variations. Now to do this, I'm going to have to switch over to Windows 8. Now look, everything I'm showing you is still applicable to version 2 of PowerShell. The only reason I'm on my Windows 8 computer is because this has got my Active Directory commands installed on it, and I want to show you something that has to do with Active Directory. So I want to show you the new AD user command. We're going to look at the full help for this. Now, this thing has got a couple of parameters that you can work with, but if you kind of dive into these, don't let your eyes cross. That's what my eyes are doing right now. You'll see parameters like office, country, company. I've got city in here somewhere. There's city. I'll have division and department. So these parameters are really just the text fields that you might fill in the GUI when you're creating a new user. I want to look at the full help though. Let's get down to some of those. Like city. Oh, look, the example is city Las Vegas. That's where I live. City accepts pipeline input by property name. Company by property name. Country by property name. Department by property name. In fact, most of these parameters accept pipeline input by property name. So this is going to be cool. Let's create a new file. Name, SAM account name. Now look, I want you to know something here. It's completely possible to create a user account with a blank SAM account name. You can do it once because the first time it's unique. You won't be able to log on as that user, but you can do it. I know you probably think, no, it's impossible, but that's because the GUI has always stopped you from doing it. Active Directory is fine with it the first time because it's unique the first time. So that's why I'm including this SAM account name column. I need to make sure I'm providing a SAM account name. Title, city, department. Yeah, that's good. Don J. I'll be the CIO. I live in Las Vegas and I work in IT. Greg S. Greg will be janitor. Greg lives in Denver and works in the custodial department. We'll save that. Import CSV users.csv. I get 2 objects because I had 2 data lines. Each object has properties that correspond with my header. That means that's all I have to do. Now I put a what if there on purpose, but you can see that would have created user Don J and Greg S. I didn't specify another container, so they're going into the default users container in my lab.pri domain. My problem with this as an example is that while it's cute, it's not realistic. If you were going to create new users from a CSV file, that CSV file would probably originate from human resources or your personnel department, and they're going to get it wrong. They're going to look at this and go, you know, this is silly. There's no one named Sam here. There's no Sam. Stupid IT people. So I'll eliminate this information. That's probably what they meant. Silly IT people. So now, when I import, I'm missing my SAM account name. What'll happen is if I run this is it'll create the Don J user with a blank SAM account name. Then it'll give me an error creating Greg S, and the error will be user already exists. And I'm going to spend 3 hours looking at Active Directory going, no, it doesn't. There's no user called Greg S. What's the problem? It's not Greg S. It's the blank SAM account name that would have already existed. So look, so long as you can get HR to screw up consistently and give you the wrong file, we can totally fix this. Remember, previous nugget? Select object, property. Give me all of the existing properties out of the CSV file. Then, remember the little hash table? Name equals SAM account name. Expression, whatever was in the existing name property. Right? Now I have my SAM account name again. And now I'm going to let it happen. Look at that. Get AD user minus filter star. There he is. There's Don and there's Greg. So I pulled those over from that CSV file by relying on that whole business of pipeline parameter binding. That is really, really, really cool stuff. Now I'm gonna do another one here. Let's go back and look at the help for new AD user because I want to show you a trick. Look at the full help on this. I need to find out how do I specify the container where these guys go into. Is it target? Is it hash table? There's so many parameters. Oh, there it is. Path. So let's see if path accepts pipeline input. Get it down all the way to the LMNO. Oops. Oh, not yet. PPA postal. I think I must have passed it. Path. Does this accept? Dang it. Pipeline input. Yes. Awesome. Okay, so look here. I'm going to add a path. And I'm going to have to change folks' names here. Chris G gets to be the new CIO. And Jason H. I can't do that to Jason. I will totally get yelled at if I make him a janitor. And he's bigger than me. So here in the path, let's just put in CNIT. We need to put this in quotes because these have commas. CNIT DC equals lab, DC equals PRI. All right, I'm going to do this for both of these guys with a little copy paste action. Save. Good. Now, let's do that import again. Where's my import? That's the one I want. So now I've got my path. Now I've got my SAM account name. I got everything in there. I want to point something out. That ITCN is wrong. It should be OU. Try it again. There we go, OU. Now look, that doesn't exist. If I actually run this command, I would expect an error because that path does not exist in my directory. And there's a reason I'm showing it to you that way. New AD user minus path, which I'm going to spell correctly by using tab completion. Path, CN equals users, DC equals lab, DC equals PRI. When you specify a parameter manually, like I've done here with the path parameter, you override anything coming in from the pipeline that would have connected to that. So normally, because I am piping in an object that has a path property, and because the minus path parameter accepts pipeline input by property name, these values would have controlled the path under which these users got created. But because I am manually specifying minus path, I am overriding whatever is coming in from the pipeline. At least that is my fond and dear hope that when I hit enter, this will work. Oh. All right, so get AD user minus filter star. And there's Jason, and where does he live? It's not going to show me. Yes, there it is. He's in users, lab, PRI, and so is Chris G. So that's an important concept here. Anytime you provide a parameter yourself, you are overriding anything that would have come in from the pipeline and connected to that parameter. Very, very important concept, very important to remember, because it's really easy to kind of mess that up, but it's also an important technique. If you need to override something that's coming in from the command or from the pipeline, that's how you can do it. Just manually specify it. Now, while we're over here on my Windows 8 computer where I've got my Active Directory command, let me show you this command. This is going to grab every computer out of Active Directory. Don't run this in your 10,000 computer production environment. The filter is there to cut down on what you get back, but I'm just going to grab everything because I should just have like 4 machines. Windows 7, member, client, DC. Yeah, that's it. Okay, good. So look, these guys do have the computer's name documented here, obviously, and it's in a property called name. Now, if I look at get AD computer minus filter star, and I pipe that to get service minus name, give me all the services whose names start with S. What's going to happen here? Actually, you know what? Tell me what would happen there. If you're thinking about this right, if you're really paying attention, we know that this has a name property or parameter, and we know that it accepts pipeline input by property name, and that means it's going to try and grab a service named Win7, member, client, and so on, because this is spelled N-A-M-E, and it's going to match up to the N-A-M-E. That's obviously not what I want. I want these name properties to hook into the computer name parameter. And our good buddy select object is going to help me do it. So let's specify a label of computer name. Let's specify an expression of whatever was in the name property. And you know what? This is a good time to hit enter. Now I've got a computer name property. I've got 4 objects, and their computer names are in there. So this is perfect. Now I can try piping this to get service. I'm pretty sure I've got a firewall up that's going to stop this from working this time. Yeah, it looks like it's going to time out. Point is that'll work. Yeah, it's going to time out. Oh, well. Oh, no, it didn't. Oh, this is awesome. Oh, I'm so glad you get to see this. Look what it's doing. It's taking these objects and it's clearly attempting to attach them to the minus name parameter still, because it says I can't find a service called computer name equals DC. Here's why it's doing that. Oh, I got to let it break on that one last computer. Oh, this is fantastic. I'm so glad to get to see this. Let's give it a second to die on that last one. Okay, I'm bored of it. Go away. I will open up a new window. All right, here's what I did. Oh, this is fantastic. So let's start by looking at the help for get service. Minus full. It was hooking up to the name property. Let's look at minus name. Oh, there it is. This accepts input by property name and by value. That's the key here. It accepts strings by value, and by value always happens first. So if I do a get AD computer minus filter star, and I run that through select, and I ask it to create me a computer name property based on the old name property, that's what I get, and we pipe that to GM. And somehow this, because it's just a simple string in here, is attaching to the name parameter instead of the computer name parameter. So it's doing it by value. This is how I'm going to fix this. Oh, this is so cool. I'm going to do that because that now takes minus name off the table for pipeline input. Remember, if I specify a parameter manually, then the pipeline can't connect to it. So now PowerShell is looking at the pipeline. Man, I'd really like to hook this up to name, apparently. Not sure why that feels good, but it feels right. So I'm going to, man, he took name off the table. Well, now I'm going to have to go with plan B and hopefully plug that thing into the computer name parameter instead. Oh, and there it went. So another awesome, awesome trick. Again, Being able to convert property names mid-pipeline like that so that they connect together, knowing that you can override the pipeline input by specifying manually, all incredibly useful tricks. We're going to swing back to Windows 7 for this next trick because I don't need my AD commands anymore. Actually, you know what? I take it back. Let's go ahead and do this with the AD command because this will be fun. So let's go back to Windows 8. Let's say I've got a command, help get event log. Right, we looked at this one earlier, and it does not have its computer name parameter rigged up for pipeline input, correct? I just zoomed past it. Correct, does not accept pipeline input. That means I can't do that same trick. I can't do this and pipe it to get event log. It won't work because the computer name's got nowhere to hook up to. That's okay. Here's what I'm going to do instead. Get event log, log name security, newest 10, from computer name, in parentheses, get AD computer minus filter star. A lot of folks will try this. It will totally not work. And to show you why it doesn't work, I'm going to open up another PowerShell window because I kind of want to leave that there so we can look at it. And I'll get another little smaller window here to play with. We're going to look at the help for get event log. Now this tells me that the computer name parameter accepts objects of the type string. Is that the type of object produced by get AD computer? Get AD computer minus filter star pipe to GM. No, this command produces objects of the type AD computer. I can't feed an AD computer to a parameter that wants a string. Okay. And look, AD computer's got all this stuff. It's got distinguished name, it's got DNS host name, it's got object GUID. Computer name doesn't want that. Computer name just wants the name. Okay, no problem. So you just do this, right? Select property name. I'm going to stick that inside those parentheses instead, yeah? Look, I just get the name, right? You have got to pipe these things to get member, man. Look, this is a selected AD computer. It is still not a string. This is an object that has a name property. It's an object of the type AD computer, selected AD computer. Computer name wants a string. Here's the secret. There's another parameter called expand property. I like to call it extract. Look at the difference between that output and this output. Here, when I selected a property, I get 4 objects with a name property. Here, when I expanded the contents of the property, I just got 4 strings. And to prove that, I'm going to pipe into GM, and it produced objects of the type string. So I can come back up here, select, expand, name. That parenthetical will now return objects of the type string. It will feed them to minus computer name, and that's what minus computer name wants. And I'm going to see how many of my computers actually. Awesome. That's at least one computer returning some results. Yeah, okay, the next one exploded because it had the firewall up. So another great trick, using a parenthetical like this, extracting the contents of that property, turning it into just a plain string, just the values, feeding that to computer name means I didn't have to pipe something in to get event log. I just used this parenthetical to specify the information instead. I had to do that because the computer name parameter of get event log doesn't accept pipeline input, at least not in this version of PowerShell. So yet another awesome trick for manipulating getting data from one command to another, and really I've now shown you just about every way that you will ever need to know to get data from one command to another. We covered a lot. I showed you how PowerShell pipes information or passes data from one command to the next. It starts by plan A, by value. Plan B, if that fails, is by property name. And I showed you where to find all the details about what parameters will accept that in their own help files. Now, when you need to do by property name and your properties names don't line up, I showed you how to use that hash table trick to rename properties midway in the pipeline so that you could connect command A to command B. Now, when a parameter doesn't accept pipeline input at all, I showed you how to use parentheticals instead, and in those, you'll often find that you need to expand or extract those property values. This is an amazing set of techniques that will make you massively more productive on the command line. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.